Is the France 24 debate. We're looking at the outrage in Mexico 6 weeks after the disappearance and presumed murder of those 43 students in the town of Iguala. The students handed over by local police to local drug gangs. With us to talk about it, Efren Garcia, spokesperson for the Mexican embassy here in Paris. John Ackerman, editor-in-chief of the Mexican Law Review, teaching at the Sorbonne this semester. France 24's very own Eduardo Quay. And from London, columnist and Oxford Analytica analyst Paz Zarate, who just before the break was telling us that there's questions in Mexico over the fact that Enrique Pena Nieto did not cancel his trip to the Pacific. Now, while en route to China, Mexico's president reacting to events taking place back home, this during refueling in Alaska.
The government, for its part, shares a sense of pain with the Mexican people and the people of Ayotzinapa too. And it must be said, this is a call for justice, a call for peace, unity, and not violence or confrontation.
No a la violencia ni a la confrontación.
It is unacceptable that someone should try to use this tragedy to justify violence. You can't demand justice while acting with violence.
No se puede exigir justicia actuando con violencia.
Eduardo Quay, your thoughts?
I think that the Iguala situation is extremely important for Mexico because I think that Mexico has come to a turning point. This goes way beyond Iguala. All of the frustration that has been building over all of these years, maybe even decades, is coming out in this way, much as it has in other places, most recently, for example, in Burkina Faso. We saw a little bit of the same thing, where things that people accepted before, such as continually extending presidential terms, are no longer being accepted, and people are going out on the streets. And to answer your question, why is this still going on 6 weeks later? That's why. Because it goes way beyond. It goes way beyond this terrible injustice in Mexico, the terrible corruption. You have billions and billions of dollars in drug money that is flowing through the system, and that obviously attracts all sorts of people. And I think that the Mexican people are now saying stop, and they're no longer going to listen to what we just heard from the president. I think those words are empty words that are not going to go anywhere. Now, he may be, in a certain sense, the victim of this that has been building forever, but he certainly hasn't done much since he came into office about 2 years ago now to fix that. So I think Mexico is at this turning point, and Mexican institutions, certainly the president is a very strong institution, so we shouldn't jump to conclusions that the government is in danger or anything like that. The Mexican president is extremely strong, but certainly this will be seen. It reminds me a little bit of Tlatelolco in 1968, just before the Olympics, where Mexicans came out in mass, and that was handled by what was later revealed to be a huge massacre. Now, they can't do that anymore in this world, but here we are, and I think something is going to have to change very quickly in Mexico.
But they've already done it, Eduardo. This is the thing. I totally agree with Eduardo's analysis. This has to do with much more than just justice for the 43 kids. Especially over the last 2 years, there are two particular reforms that Pena Nieto has, and the entire political class has pushed on the Mexican population, which have created this discontent. One is the oil reform, the other is the education reform. Before Ayotzinapa, Pena Nieto was already one of the least favored presidents in Mexican history. Only about between 35% of the population approved of him before Ayotzinapa. Those statements that Pena Nieto gave.
Well, that's the way you're painting it. But
no. This is a fact. The public opinion polls demonstrate clearly that Pena Nieto is the worst evaluated president in the last 20 years, perhaps more than that, but as long as these polls have been
his economic reforms have won him praise abroad.
Internationally, but at home, no. And that's what we're seeing on the ground. This was before Ayotzinapa. Only 35% of the population approved of was his approval rating. Now, these declarations, now this is one thing, because these declarations that we saw on the television that Pena Nieto gave in Alaska it's a theater. That was a half an hour after government provocateurs had burned the National Palace. There are videos, I have them up on my recent website article, which demonstrate that National Palace was burned by government provocateurs, and in a coordinated action, all of a sudden, a few hours later, Pena Nieto goes, we say no to violence, we are in favor of peace. Violence is done by the Mexican state. We don't have to wait for Tlatelolco. This is the Tlatelolco massacre. It already happened. And so that's why the outrage is coming. Of course, hopefully there's not another one. But on Wednesday, and there's something, I know I'm taking up too much time, we can come back to it, but this Wednesday, on Monday, sorry, this Monday, the Mexican military, and you mentioned Burkina Faso. What happened in Burkina Faso? Coup d'etat. On Monday, the Mexican military, front page on Tuesday, but on Monday, the general, Cienfuegos, said, we are ready to intervene. Not only to combat organized crime, but we are ready to intervene to defend Enrique Pena Nieto's political reforms, structural reforms, economic reforms. This is a political agenda that the military is setting out there, and this is very dangerous. That's why it's very important that we're here in Paris, and that there's a lot of international attention here, because otherwise, the Mexican military, which historically has been very well disciplined, might start to get fancy ideas, and that would be dangerous.
There's a lot of differences between 1968, what it happened in 1968, and now. There's now a policy, a state policy, to the respect of the human rights, and that was not the case. And that was not the case that the Mexican government went to all to the world, to the international institutions, to seek for scrutiny. You say the only way that the Mexican government can diminish the anger is facing its responsibility, and that's what it's been done with the investigation which has been done in this particular case. I would like to add that it's not, I mean, everybody can have their opinion, the particular opinion, but the specific reality and the legal truth will be done after the investigations.
Well, commentators have the feeling that himself, Enrique Pena Nieto, has not been the man in charge. He didn't go there, for instance, right afterwards. That he was criticized for that as well. That he's somebody who's mishandled this from a public relations point of view.
Well, the most important thing of the message of the president, and it's applied to himself, is that the state policy in this case and any other cases we have seen here is that there won't be any impunity. That there won't be no impunity for anybody, even for him. So the society is seeing there are the institutional framework for the society to ask for the accomplishment of the law in Mexico. So that's the way to do it.
All right, no impunity. We'll pick up on that point. There are a lot of comments coming in. One on Facebook from Charles. Mexico's government really needs to get a grip on this grim situation that threatens to destroy Mexico. You say no impunity even for the president himself.
For everybody.
But and what we're getting from this past weekend is news that he's now embroiled in a corruption scandal.
But that's exactly the problem, that there has been impunity in Mexico for decades, and the Mexican people know that. And so we now get to the point where they're no longer going to accept this. There was this joke in Mexico about it's okay if they steal as long as they don't steal too much. I mean, the system of corruption and it permeates Mexican society, has always done so for at least several decades. And as I said before, I think that we are now at a point where it's becoming something will have to be done, or Mexico could spiral into violence. And the comments about the army are very important because the Mexican military has traditionally, since the revolution, kept outside.
I'd like to say something about that. In the case that Mr. Ackerman said, it's the first time for the military who killed or are assumed to killed some people. It's the first time, because of the changes in Mexican rules, that the civil are trialing military. It's the first time that has been done. It's the military, but it's also the civil authorities who are trialed this military. So there has been some very important advances in the development of legal framework
and that only happened
of the rules.
You're right. Well, I'll give that point to the Mexican government. They are now trying 7 or 8 military officials in civilian courts. This is a major advance in terms of justice. But why are they doing it? Because of the international pressure. They're being tried not for this massacre, but for the previous massacre on June 30th in Tlatlaya, which was absolutely and totally covered up by all levels of government, in particular by the federal attorney general, for 3 months, until the Associated Press and an independent witness came out and made this international scandal. This was before Ayotzinapa, before this more recent massacre, and that's what forced the Mexican government to now try these military. Today, with the new massacre in Iguala, which was much worse, once again, the military and the federal officials are being protected. Murillo Karam, the Attorney General, has not opened up any lines of investigation towards federal officials. And once again, this will only happen if we put international eyes on this. I think we need to ask the Mexican government, I would ask you here as a representative of the Mexican government, will the Mexican government investigate possible federal complicity with the massacre of Iguala?
It would be investigated off the lines of investigation. And moreover, I will say it's not international pressure. It's the Mexican government who is seeking the international cooperation with international organizations. Mexico is a state party to 9 universal treaties and 7 regional treaties, which are part of the framework of human rights obligations for our country. And as a result of its second universal period review, Mexico fully accepted 166 recommendations in order to strengthen the protection of human rights and accelerate the implementation of international standards. So, in that way, we could say that Mexican government is looking for international, not pressure, but scrutiny. And I think that's an important advance. The changes can be done from one day to another, and the anger is understandable. But the most important thing is that the institution could be strengthened and with the help of everybody. And to face the rage, the only way to do it, but by the point of view of the government, is to avoid absolutely impunity for everybody, even for the president, even for the senators, for everybody. That's the most important part of the message of the president of Mexico.
Paz Zarate, do you agree that there is a silver lining in all of this, that Mexico is changing?
I think here there's another area where we see a gap between the official narrative and reality. I think the good intentions, I don't doubt the good intentions of the Mexican government, but the truth is that international organizations, a month before Iguala, are all in accord saying that the situation of human rights in Mexico is critical and asking the Mexican government to recognize the committee, the UN Committee on Forced Disappearances, which has not been done. The Mexican president has said, let's call for a national pact of unity in calling for peace so that there's no other crime like Iguala. And the truth is that there are several Igualas happening every month that do not get coverage by the press. The statistics are that 7 people disappear each day, around 500 each month, and that makes 10,000 over the last year and a half. So there's unfortunately a big gap between the good intentions of the Mexican government and what really is happening. I can only equate the situation, and this is what, going back to the point of the outrage, of in the case of the Chilean miners. If the Chilean miners had been found dead and the president had gone out of the country the next day, the outrage would have been similar in Chile. And Chile does not have the problem of massive violations of human rights, that's certainly of torture that Mexico is accused of by international organizations. So it's a very serious issue. I think President Pena Nieto could continue to pursue the reformist agenda, which has been rightly praised by the world, but it will have to present a comprehensive strategy to address all of human rights violations, including Iguala and the many other 1,000 disappearances, as well as the torture, massive torture spread in the armed forces and in the police. And if the government is able to present to the Mexican society that type of pact, I think it could calm down the outrage and could settle back to an environment that could allow for the implementation of the reforms, because now we are at that stage. If that doesn't happen, if the strategy is only limited to Iguala as an exception, then it's not really reflecting what the statistics of the own Mexican government is. 94% of impunity. That is the current reality of Mexico.
All right, one reaction on Facebook from Dominar. A bit ominous. Mexico is a dying nation, he says, and will cease to even be a country in 8 to 10 years. It will be another Somalia.
If I could comment on that, I think that really indicates a lack of knowledge about Mexico. Mexicans are very united as a people and very proud of their country. And to compare it to Somalia and to say that it's a dying nation is, excuse me, but nonsense.
And also, but more broadly, we're seeing the homicide rate has gone down nonetheless, despite all of this. It's not all bad news, is it?
No, and I think that the reforms that Pena Nieto has implemented, of course, they are painful, but they have been praised by the international community. There are reforms that were absolutely necessary, particularly in the energy field, but also in the education field. The problem is that Mexicans are not seeing those reforms translate into a better economic situation for themselves. The economy is somewhat stagnated, and so their daily lives are not improving. But I think he has to be given some credit for being courageous about some of these economic reforms.
This is very important because Pena Nieto has been governing for international public opinion. That's why now, all of a sudden, there's some government attention to these massacres because international public opinion is intervening. What really needs to change in Mexico is that we need a government who governs for national public opinion, who cares about his own people. These energy and education reforms, I am totally against them, but leave that aside. We can debate that in a different space, Eduardo and I. The important thing is that the Mexican people are absolutely against them. The amount of people who supported the education or the education reform or the oil reform, this is why before this massacre, Enrique Pena Nieto was already hated by his people, by most of the Mexican people. So what we need is a real political change here. We need people in government who actually are accountable and care about the Mexican people. The problem here is that since December 1st, 2012, in which Pena Nieto, he's not any old politician. He represents the old guard of the old party, the party of the institutional revolution. Enrique Pena Nieto is from Atlacomulco, which is the heart of mafia politics in Mexico. And that's what needs to change in Mexico.
I'd like to say something about what Paz just told us. Mexican government, it is important to acknowledge that there are still important gaps that affect the perception of Mexico regarding the attention given to human rights challenges. And there are specific opportunities that the government have been identified on, particularly on torture, enforced disappearance, homicides and extrajudicial executions, and journalists and human rights defenders. There are concrete plans about these very harmful problems. In particularly, I will not say about all the strategies and the work plans of all these problems, but I would like to stress about enforced disappearances. The work plan includes 6 things. Align the definition of enforced disappearance with international law. Because of that, in 2013, the President presented an initiative to reform the federal criminal code.
We maybe don't have time for 6 points.
Okay. Well,
but basically, you're saying there is a plan for...
There is plans to face these problems, and moreover, I'd like to say that today, as something that the relatives of the students asked, it has been signed the agreement for technical assistance for the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights in Mexico, so to help the Mexican government and to assist technically the Mexican government to find out the truth, the legal truth in what happened in Ayotzinapa.
All right, let me read to you, Efren Garcia, what one columnist wrote in the Financial Times. Nobody expects Pena Nieto to sort out Mexico's security problems overnight, but Mexicans do expect clarity of purpose and a security strategy on the par with the economic initiatives that eventually make incidents such as Iguala impossible.
And we are absolutely, we think that that's absolutely true. Economic reforms are very important for Mexico and have been achieved.
But that there has been a lack of a strategy, a lack of a clear strategy on security matters.
No, there's a clear strategy on security matters, and that's why first of all, the legal framework has been changed, and the institutions has been strengthened as well, such as the creation of the gendarmerie. The President Calderon began his government only with 4,000 federal policemen. Now there are a lot more, and this has been created the gendarmerie. So it has been
But,
a lot of investment, economic investment, and legal and institutional, structural investment in order to change things and to have a clear security strategy to face all those challenges.
Pazarate.
Yes, I realize that there has been a number of progresses on the part of the Mexican government trying to abide by international law and the advice by international institutions. However, we have spoken about human rights, we have spoken about security and the drug trafficking organizations, but we have not really spoken about the rule of law. And the OECD, which is the club of the developing countries of the developing world to which Mexico belongs, I think Mexico would be the only country in the OECD that has this high number of disappearances and this level of recommendations and pressure from the international community with challenges to address. And the OECD repeatedly has recommended Mexico to address the issue of the rule of law and the lack of faith of citizens in state institutions as a priority. And I think in that case, the Mexican government did not see it as a priority together with the economic reforms. Mexicans do not trust their institutions. This is very important, and this is why only 10% of crimes are reported. And of that 10%, we've seen that over 90% gets total impunity. So it's very important that there is a plan, as a friend is mentioning from the part of the Mexican government. But I'm afraid that the reaction is late. And it's not comprehensive, and this is behind the outrage.
Paz-Zarate, I want to thank you for joining us today. I want to thank Efren Garcia.
Thank you very much.
Eduardo Quay and John Ackerman. Stay with us because our Media Watch segment is next. Thus, we say hello to James Creed.
Good evening, Francois. Just a quick look, first of all, at the debate topic this evening, which has generated, as you can expect, an awful lot of comment and reaction online over the last week or so. Some of the hashtags that have been gathering together comment and outrage as well. Yo también ya me cansé. Not sure if that's well pronounced or not, but...
I know what you're talking about.
Thank you. This is a response, of course, to the Attorney General's rather flippant remark at a press conference where he said, "Enough, I'm tired," and it became a rallying cry across social media. Well, we're tired too, you know. You can stick out a press conference because there are, you know, we're tired for a lot more legitimate reasons, perhaps. A lot of images as well across social media expressing solidarity, concern, upset, all of that. You can see a gathering of them there in this twit pic. Other tweet hashtags there as well that speak volumes. Narco government, narco state, narco estado. I mean, you could say that they're all over the top, perhaps, or simplifying the issue down to catchphrases like that. But it does show the level of outrage, I think, pretty effectively. Also, of course, over the last week or two, an awful lot of concern and solidarity with the students. You can see just one example of it here at the University of Puerto Rico. Students honoured the 43 students who were murdered with photos of them on classroom chairs. Now, in terms of comment on media, just a quick look at some of the reactions. This is the America's Quarterly Review. Now, they're sort of being optimistic about things, Francois. They're saying, well, actually, if you look at the overall statistics, violence and murders are decreasing in Mexico.
Everything being relative.
Right. Homicides, for example, the most reliable indicator for measuring public security, as they put it, decreased by 13% between 2012 and 2013. And a Mexico City-based public policy consulting firm, they calculated that just under 2,000 organised crime-related deaths were registered in the second quarter of 2014. That's down from a high of 4,500 in the second quarter of 2011. So perhaps things are going in the right direction, but online, or rather international media reaction is registering the disgust and outrage in Mexico. For example, Wednesday's editorial in the New York Times, Law and Order in Mexico, they say that the public is understandably outraged. In short, when gang members, security forces and others killed, they know there's a good chance they can get away with it. So we'll be looking at that a little bit later on too, Francois. But of course, the big buzz of the day is touchdown. will be indeed.
And a flag waving to Europe.
A little bit, just a little bit. Actually, the French rolling news channels are talking about nothing else today, so there is a little bit of French and European
this is that
patriotism.
Space probe landing on a comet.
That's right, Rosetta, European Spatial Ambassador, says Libération. And you've got various images coming through on social media. Do you know that Rosetta, Francois, has its own social media or Twitter account? And it's dialoguing with the Philae lander, and they're congratulating each other. A lot of online backslapping between the two. Francois, I'll just finish with this tweet. Generations ago, we collectively marvelled at the moon landing. Now we individually go, huh, when comet landing comes up on our feeds. Not sure if that's true.
Not when you speak to the scientists we had earlier in our studio.
Right.
I want to thank you, James Creedon. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.